Hello, we are the Three Musketeers, also known as David Carrillo, Becky Booten, and Stephanie Ammett. Today, we are going to share with you our experience with proposing and passing legislation around homelessness and unsheltered individuals. So, just a little bit of background. I am an outreach worker with encampments in Salt Lake City, and a week before Christmas in December, we had 5 people freeze to death. Since then, there has been at least 12. And in this society, like, we shouldn't have that problem. And I knew those people. So me alongside other advocates such as Wendy Garvin from Unsheltered Utah got together and we drafted a proposal modeled after several other states and Ogden, Utah, called Code Blue. And Becky's going to go ahead and tell you a little bit about our process there.
Okay, so if you can see in this slide here, this is some of my family, not all my siblings, but my brother on the right there in the light blue hoodie. He has struggled with drug addiction and been homeless. And so I'm a huge advocate for this bill as well. He has shared personal stories about being out on the streets when it's cold and friends of his that have suffered and had frozen limbs and different things that have transpired to them because they haven't been able to be let into the shelters at night because they're full. So I'm an advocate for this bill as it's affected me and my family personally as well. In Utah, there is not sufficient shelters in place for the homeless when temperatures drop below 15 degrees. The proposed Code Blue protocol would require counties to open emergency shelters by either expanding capacity of existing shelters or using private property, such as community churches, to provide shelter during freezing temperatures. In the book, Jansen states, social justice occurs when specific populations, such as low-income persons, are subject to violation of civil rights and human rights, violations of life conditions, and violations of access to opportunities, which is exactly what this bill is after. So during this process, I was able to go with Stephanie up to the Capitol building during some of the meetings. And one that was really impactful for me was the House Business and Labor Committee meeting. Wendy Garvin of Unsheltered Utah boldly stated during her testimony, "For anyone who believes this bill isn't needed, I urge you to come in and turn people away without shoes." She then goes on to point out that on the coldest and most dangerous nights, they turn away anywhere from 10 to 25 individuals seeking shelter. So is this an issue? Here are some things that would point that it is. In December 2022, a week before Christmas, like Stephanie mentioned, in Salt Lake City, 5 unsheltered individuals died to exposure in extreme cold weather. In the winter months, the homeless shelters are filled to capacity and turn away dozens of people. Salt Lake City had a deficit of 600 permanent housing units this past winter. In the fiscal year of 2022, in Salt Lake City alone, it was reported that 9,640 people experienced homelessness. And in 2022, it was reported from Fox 13 News that 150 Utahns experiencing homelessness had died that year. The HB 499 is a controversial bill with bipartisan support. Why? Well, right-leaning politicians feel this may only lead to an increase of homelessness and want to focus more on how to stop the growth of it. There is a slight undertone of NIMBY, which means not in my backyard. People see the need, but they aren't willing to have it affect where they live. There are currently 2 counties in Utah that do not even have homeless shelters available for this vulnerable population. And then lastly, we want the problem fixed, but we have minimal interest in funding it. So it creates a patchwork approach and nothing really ever gets solved. So the success of this bill passing is due to these key players: Unsheltered Utah, Nomad Alliance, Salt Lake Valley Coalition to End Homelessness, and our unsheltered relatives. And then a big shout out to Representative Steve Ellison, who sponsored the bill. And then of course, our own Stephanie Ammett for helping in writing this bill and then advocating for it. David, we'll turn the time over to you.
Thank you, Becky. So I will be explaining what the Code Blue entails when it does go into enforcement time. So the Code Blue is actually modeled after Maryland's protocol, which has been met with much success. And what it does that when temperatures are due to hit 15 degrees Fahrenheit or less, it actually will lift some restrictions as well as add some restrictions. So these 3 R's are the first restriction it will lift is that it will allow community buildings and private buildings, so community such as rec centers and churches, to circumvent the rules of zoning and capacity and allow overflow into their buildings. So like when Becky mentioned that they had to turn away 15 to 25 individuals during these deep freezes, it'll allow for that those people not to have to be turned away, and they can come in even though the regular capacity would not allow that. The other 2 restrictions are that it will restrict the encampment abatements. And what that means is that the city has to come and sweep up these locations because it can tend to become quite unhygienic and unsanitary. And so when these people are seeking shelter elsewhere, the cities like to come and clean this up without their knowledge, but it'll restrict that so that their belongings will stay in place when they do come back. As well, it does restrict the seizure of people's property, of these homeless. When they go to these shelters, they're not going to be able to bring most of their stuff. Most of the time, they'll be able to bring a backpack's worth of stuff. And usually their big items, pillows, tents, sleeping bags, and other such items had to be left behind. And so it'll also prevent the police department and the cities from taking these things that are necessary for survival. And I'll go ahead and give that back to the time to you, Stephanie.
Thank you, David. Okay, so after helping to draft the proposal, I met with Representative Steve Elison as well as the state homeless coordinator, Wayne Niederhauser, and we went over Code Blue and what departments would be over it. We modeled it after the Maryland plan, as David had said. After that, because we were so late in the session, we weren't able to open up a new bill file separately for this bill. So it was written into another bill that mandates, it was called Homeless Services Amendments. And it talks about the mitigation funds that the cities can get if they have winter planning for overflow. And so Code Blue part of the bill that we helped implement begins on line 909 of the bill. And it's House Bill 499 from the 2023 general session on the Utah legislature website. You can find it there at le.utah.gov if you would like to reference it. The process that we went through for our project, we went to the committee meetings where the bill was heard and passed, such as Becky told you. And then we also watched via virtual meetings on both the House and the Senate floor and watched it pass in the debate there. The accomplishment is that it actually passed both chambers and has since been signed by the governor. All of the objectives that were written into the proposal that David was discussing were left in the proposal and not changed aside from the temperature. Instead of the 26 degrees that we had proposed, it was written as 15 degrees to try to make it a rare thing. However, with it being as low as 15 degrees, we feel like there's probably not going to be a huge difference in the lives that this impacts. So we'll probably discuss that in future meetings. The future of this and the success and good news about that is that there are going to be future meetings. I was invited to a meeting this week on Friday to meet with the Salt Lake County mayors and start planning winter response for this coming year. I've been working on legislation for individuals experiencing homelessness and providing connection and outreach with the encampments in Salt Lake City. My passion comes from being homeless myself. I was homeless for 5 years, which I learned a lot, right? And so having that lived experience helps to give a voice on the table. And that's where I come in, and that's why I sit on the lived expert task force of the Salt Lake Valley Coalition and Homelessness. The fact that I was invited this week and the fact that we're starting to invite people with lived experience to these meetings and to these planning sessions is a huge success. there's a saying, nothing about us without us. And so being able to bring people in who are going through it is huge. It's a big step forward, and it makes me very hopeful. I will go ahead and we will end this presentation with the video clip that we made. And yeah, I mean, we just encourage that if you see somebody out there cold, hand them a blanket. People do freeze to death out there. It is this serious.
Of Steve Ellison, the bill's sponsor, on the line live with us right now. Good morning.
Good morning.
So practically speaking, this legislation, if it all gets through Capitol Hill and signed by the governor, what does this look like out on the streets?
Yeah, thank you. So we've seen just this winter, upwards of a dozen unsheltered individuals freeze to death just between Salt Lake and Utah counties. And, I don't think it's any secret that there's lots of challenges in citing either a permanent or a temporary homeless shelter. And so the introduction of this concept called Code Blue would basically say once the temperature hits a certain point, it triggers very flexible zoning. It doesn't require any zoning approval whatsoever. It grants that automatically to where different facilities, community centers, churches could be automatically opened up to shelter people from the frigid temperatures and hopefully prevent a humanitarian disaster if we have, extremely low temperatures and if our other shelters are full. We need this kind of automatic mechanism to protect people.